Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be talking about Zhongli. We talked about Neuvillette in the last video, really went over a build guide on him pretty in depth. Zhongli is the other character that is going to be on the other, obviously on the other banner, but he's the other 5-star and obviously a little bit of an older character, but he is the Archon of Neuvillette. Now the great thing to know about Zhongli is obviously the best shield support we have in the game, and honestly with these two characters coming up right before 5.3, and we just had the live stream happen as well, it's very interesting because someone like Neuvillette, who is regarded as the best DPS in the game, and I talked about this in the last video, is almost going to get quote-unquote, you know, maybe power creep, maybe look at like maybe another character being extremely good or push him off his pedestal, is Mawika. Not only that, but we have someone like Zhongli, and in the future, and also in 5.3, we're going to be getting someone named Citlali, who is also a shielder, and very, very good shielder to the point where she does a lot of extra things outside of just shielding as well, being an extremely good support. Now, Zhongli has some really good supportive capabilities as well as damage, but it's very interesting to see how maybe these two characters might get pushed down in rank just by the next version. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the trial for the characters and actually look at Zhongli. Now, the great thing, once again, that I said with Zhongli is he is the best shield character right now in the game. And that brings a lot of good things with it. Obviously, he's an extremely easy character to build. A lot of the times you'll see people build him one of usually two ways. The first way being tank bot, which it looks like this is what this person is kind of going after, or at least I shouldn't say this person, more or less the Zhongli that is in here right now. Now, the weapon you probably want to go for like an HP percent, but usually you want to go for a butt ton of HP just so that you can have a lot of shielding to make sure that that shield's not going to break. And if you go tank bot Zhongli, you'll never see it break. The other way to usually build Zhongli is more of a combo of both shield and damage. Usually you'll see a lot of people throw on a Staff of Homa or something like that, run him with a little bit of crit, and allow his burst to do a lot of good damage for your team as well, and allow him here and there to have some extra damage to put out for the team. But still, you'll see them build a certain way to make sure that he's still shielding extremely well, and that shield also does not break very easily, if at all. The third way, which I don't really think that a lot of people do, but obviously because Zhongli's personal weapon goes towards this route, Vortex Vanquisher, it's an attack percent main stat weapon, it increases shield strength by 20%, so still allowing some shield bot capabilities, but also scoring hits on opponents increases attack as well. While protected by a shield though, this attack increase effect is increased by 100%. So there's a nice attack buff that you're going to get there. This is more of a personal damage Zhongli that you're really going to see here. The damage from the burst is based off of attack, and even the stone steel damage that his, basically the thing that creates his shield or one of the pillars that he throws out is also going to be doing attack or the attack damage as well, and even the hold versions as well. The only thing that really uses HP in his entire kit actually is just his shield absorption. Then obviously his normal and charge attacks and plunging attacks will also be increased because they're based off of attack. Usually though, you don't see people usually run him this way just because the weapon isn't all that necessarily amazing, and once again, a lot of people are just going to go for like a 3-star weapon, which we'll talk about later in the future. But first, let's go ahead and talk about his talents. With leveling priority with Zhongli, don't really worry about the normal attack. With the characters in the trial, they're going to level all three or four if they have them. If you're going the tank bot route, you're only going to be focusing on the skill, because that's really mainly where you're going to be focusing for your shield. If you're building both skill and burst, or you're trying to do that hybrid build that usually people try to go for, then you're going to want to make sure to level the burst at the same level that you level your skill. Try to make these two even as you slowly upgrade them. So if you can max, you know, all your other characters are max level 6, then try to get these to level 6, both of them together. If you're at the end game and you're crowning and everything, probably the best way to do things is to crown both of these, to be honest with you. Now, if you are building the way of Zhongli kind of being a personal like DPS idea with his personal weapon, or at least just having some pretty good damage with his weapon and kind of going that route, and maybe a normal attack or charge attack type idea, then maybe you might want to do leveling into all three of these and then just doing it pretty even as well. As you see with the trial, leveling all three at the same level, that's really what you're going to want to do. He's a very basic character. His normal attack doesn't have anything special in it, but his skill is once again where his shield comes in. So by using your skill, you have a press and a hold version. The press version just commands the power of the earth to create a stone steel, which is going to be the pillar that he creates. But if you do a hold version, it causes energy or nearby geo energy to explode, causing the following effects. If their maximum number has been reached, you will then create a stone steel. create a shield of jade as well to the active character. The shield's damage absorption scales based on Zhongli's max HP, deals AoE geo damage, and if there are any nearby targets with the geo element on, it will drain a large amount of geo element from a maximum of 2 such targets. This effect does not cause damage though. Keep this in mind as you are kind of running with Zhongli, because the great thing about using the press versus the hold version, the press version just throws out a stone steel. The hold version is where you're actually getting your shield, because of this right here. Also keep in mind that the only way at C0 Zhongli to have, you can only have one of these stone steels out at one time. The stone steels themselves, when created, deal AoE geo damage when they are initially created. Also, additionally, it will intermittently resonate with other nearby geo constructs, dealing geo damage as well. Now, this does do its own intermittent damage anyways, but when it does have other, constructs nearby, like you have Chiori's things are constructs, Albedo has a construct, Ito has a construct. There are plenty of other Geo characters that have Geo constructs that can be used with this that will also help as well. The Stone Steel is then considered a Geo construct in and of itself, and that can also be climbed and used to block attacks. So you can stand behind the Stone Steel from an attack and use it as a way to dodge attacks instead of actually having to worry about it. But that's really, you're already using the hold skill to create a huge shield for yourself on the active character, which that just goes to show that you don't really need the stone steel to block any of the attacks. Now, looking at the Jade shield that he gets when you use the hold version of the skill, he will possess 150% damage absorption against all elemental and physical damage. Characters protected by the Jade Shield will decrease the elemental resistance and physical resistance of opponents in a small AoE by 20%, and that effect cannot be stacked among multiple Zhonglis is what that means. Also, if you create multiple pillars, it does not mean that you get multiple shields and therefore multiple resistance shreds. But it is a 20% resistance shred to all elements as well as physical damage as well, so even characters like Eula or whatnot can also work with this, as well as legitimately any element, which is why Zhongli is usually always thrown in as a random 4th slot somewhere. It's just because of this extra piece, but also he's just an amazing shielder, so he can be a sustain as well as a good buffer. Looking beyond the skill though, looking at his burst, it's basically he just takes a huge Geo Rock and slams it into the ground, but also will allow him to apply the petrification status to enemies. Petrification states that opponents that are affected by petrification status cannot move. So that is kind of nice as well, especially if you have a bunch of enemies that like to run around a lot. It is helpful to have that huge AoE damage hit. Obviously, once again, this is a very nice way to go into his damage, because once again, this is attack, but it's mainly used, once again, to kind of have someone or the enemies just kind of sit still and not being able to move. The other great thing is that it's only a 40 energy cost, so he is not energy hungry at all, which allows you to either go more into HP as a tank bot, or it allows you to go a little bit more into some crit or attack or something like that to maybe allow him to do a little bit more damage if you're going that kind of like combo route where you're doing both of that hybrid tank a little bit as well as a little bit more in damage. So it kind of just depends on what you want. Looking at the passives, when Jade Shield takes damage, it will fortify itself. Fortified characters have 5% increased shield strength, and that can stack up to 5 times until the Jade Shield disappears. So as you get hit, the shield gets stronger, but that does mean that, eventually it will break, but it does mean that it stays on longer, which is another reason, honestly, that passive talent is another reason why that shield is so good. Zhongli will deal bonus damage based on his max HP as well, so the normal, charged, and plunging attack damage is increased by 1.39% of his max HP. Stone Steel, Resonance, and the hold damage is also increased by 1.9% of his max HP as well, and the burst damage is increased by 33% of his max HP. So, as I was kind of talking about him, I knew that this was coming up, but technically, a lot of people are still going to go into attack, and this is just another reason why his weapon is seen as less necessary, because of all the attack stats, and then all of a sudden you throw this second passive in, which is another reason why usually even still going into a tank bot, going a bunch into HP, you can easily throw yourself into a hybrid build very easily by just switching around some crits to make sure that you have an insane amount of mainly HP, and then just putting everything else that you have time and energy into crit. Now allowing yourself, giving yourself probably a crit rate circlet, and maybe even a crit damage weapon, once again, like Staff of Homa, allows you to have a pretty good crit ratio. You don't have to worry about energy recharge, so the only other thing you have to worry about is the 2 crits and a bunch of HP. Another reason why Zhongli is an extremely easy character to build, but it also allows a little bit more versatility on how you want to build him as well. Now, looking a little bit beyond this, I want to talk about weapons. Obviously, Vortex Vanquisher is his personal weapon, and that it can be a good weapon, but I have kind of talked down about it, and honestly, that is because I'm not a fan of this weapon. Now, that might not make a lot of sense to newer players, but older players, you're going to understand that Vortex Vanquisher is not a very good weapon at all. And that's just once again because of the reasons I've already stated. The second passive talent already increases your damage based off of HP. Going more into HP is only going to help even more. So there's absolutely no reason really to run Zhongli in that way. But there's two basic ways that I want to talk about Zhongli before we actually look at, or I guess there's three ways. The first way is I want to talk about, which is the more shield support. So going into that tank build. Favonius Lance is an ER main stat weapon. This is going to help a little bit more, and you might be saying, okay, I don't have to worry about ER, and that's very fair, that's very true, but you have a lot of way of creating particles with Fav, but even still, above Favonius Lance is something like Black Tassel, and that's why I usually go 5, 4, and 3 stars. So the only reason I say the 4-star, it's not better than the 3-star, I just basically stated it because it is the 4-star, which is a higher rarity. But it's not better than the 3-star Black Tassel. And the reason why is Black Tassel is an HP percent main stat with almost 47% HP at level 90. And the ability on it states that it increases damage against slimes by 40%. Isn't that amazing? And at R5, you get 80% of that damage. Basically, with this weapon, you can easily see you really don't care about the ability there. What you really care about is the massive amount of HP that you can get. It can easily allow you to focus a lot more, maybe on some more crit while you're looking at your character, but also allows you to just never have to worry about your HP ever. And that can also mean that you can maybe go for like a geo damage bonus goblet on this kind of build. But like normal, with this type of character, you're probably going to be going full tank bot HP, which means HP is what we're talking about in the weapon. The other way to build Zhongli, and probably the more normal way to build Zhongli for a lot of Zhongli lovers, is more of a burst support, or what we call a hybrid build. The hybrid build usually, once again, focuses on going into crit as well as HP stacking. Now, there are a few good weapons that you can use. The first one, like I stated before, is going to be Staff of Homa. Staff of Homa at level 90 is giving 66.2% crit damage with a 608 base attack. Also, the ability increases HP by 20%, which Zhongli likes because that's what his damage is going to be based off of, because of the second passive talent. His damage, though, is also technically based off of the initial attack, though. So, the ability on the weapon in Staff of Homa, increasing attack based off of your HP, is not only helping someone like Hu Tao, who turns her HP into attack to do damage with attack, but Zhongli has two ways to kind of increase his attack as well as increase his HP, and it's helping him in two separate ways, both with the weapon and with the second passive talent. Another reason why this weapon is extremely good. Then you combine this with a crit rate circlet and a little bit more crit rate on some of the ability or the artifacts here and there, and you've got an extremely well built Zhongli with a butt ton of HP that you don't ever have to worry about that shield breaking, and he's going to be extremely good for that burst hit whenever he actually gets it. Once again, keeping that 40 energy cost, you really don't have to worry about energy recharge at all. Looking at another weapon that can work is going to be Primordial Jadewing Spear, or Zhongli's son, Zhao's weapon. This weapon at level 90 is going to give 22.1% crit rate and 674 base attack. Now, once again, I did state that his damage is still going to be based off of attack, but the second passive talent does kind of just help with the overall help of a little bit more HP, doing a little bit more for his kit. So with the ability, though, it states that on hit, it increases attack by 3.2% for 6 seconds. This is at R1, and the max of 7 stacks will be happening here. This effect can only occur once every 0.3 seconds, and while in possession of the maximum possible stacks, all damage dealt is increased by 12%. What that means is as you hit more with Zhongli, the more that Primordial Jadewing Spear is going to do for you. While it's a great weapon, I don't necessarily think that it's going to be extremely good. Honestly, Vortex Vanquisher isn't terrible for this type of build. Once again, as you can see here, the increase to shield strength is very good. It's still helping him in that kind of hybrid build, but also the hits that you do, once again, like Zhao's weapon, is also giving you some extra attack for his personal damage. And then when you get more of those stacks and you have the max of 5, then you get an extra attack increase of 100%. So it's just kind of nice overall just to see a lot more attack that you can get through the character. And that doesn't, by the way, mean 100% attack as a stat itself. It means 100% of the previous buff that you have. So what that really means overall is that you're getting a bunch of attack, which is extremely good considering the attack percent main stat is very nice here. But that does mean that you're leaving a big hole on crit, which in my personal opinion isn't really a fan of. I don't really have a fan of that in any way, shape, or form. The other weapons that can be used that I know could be talked about is something like Skyward Spine or Calamity Queller or Engulfing Lightning. I'm sure those weapons have their place somewhat here and there, and if you have them and want to use them, I don't think that they're terrible. I just really don't think that they really do better than the other weapons that I just stated. But looking at 4 stars really quickly, we have something like the Catch, which can be a pretty good weapon actually when you are looking at the kind of hybrid build of him as a character. Now, the main stat is energy recharge at 45.9%, but if you have R5 on this weapon, you're increasing your elemental burst damage by 32% and elemental burst crit rate by 12%. Once again, the major way that you're kind of doing damage with him is going to be using him as a burst support, using him as that hybrid build, only really caring about his burst whenever that pops up for damage. So I would just say that the R5 Catch is a pretty good weapon. Another weapon that can be used is something like Deathmatch. I always sing Deathmatch's praise just because it has the crit rate main stat of 36.8% at level 90. And as you get a little bit more with the kit or the ability in the weapon, it states that if there are at least 2 opponents nearby, attack is increased and defense is increased. And if there are fewer than 2 opponents, 0 or 1, attack is fully increased even a little bit more. Once again, the major way that you're focusing Zhongli to do damage is through attack. The HP, though, does carry a lot of weight, so that's why this weapon is a little bit lower in the rankings. Something like Lithic Spear could also be a pretty good weapon. Zhongli himself is a Liyue character, and with this weapon giving 27.6% attack, much like his own personal weapon, it can be pretty good. But the ability is where it really shines. If you can get other characters like Xiangling or something like that in the team that we see here in the trial, for every character in the party who hails from Liyue, the character who equips this weapon gains 7% attack increase and a 3% crit rate increase, with 4 stacks being the maximum, meaning you can get 28% attack and 12% crit rate. And that's not even at R5, which is an even higher buff. So I do think that this weapon actually does have some pretty good usability, especially if you're using a lot of other, consistently with his teams, a lot of other Liyue characters. You could obviously use something like Blackcliff Pole, crit damage main stat weapon. It's basically Staff of Homa, just worse. It is still a pretty good weapon though. You're getting some extra attack when you defeat opponents, but honestly it's that main stat of 55.1% crit damage that's allowing you to kind of have this hybrid build that can kind of hang out and do well for you somewhat as well. There are other weapons like Missive Wind Spear or Favonius Lance that you could throw on your Zhongli that do work for this hybrid build, but that's kind of overall what we're going to look at for that one. The physical DPS route with looking at Zhongli, Vortex Vanquisher is pretty high up there. Primordial Jadewing Spear and Staff of Homa are still up there, but there's a new 4-star weapon that I want to talk about specifically only when you are talking about making Zhongli a physical DPS, and that is going to be the 4-star Polearm Crescent Pike. The main stat on the weapon is physical damage bonus at 34.5%, and the ability states at R1 that after picking up an elemental orb, particle, normal, and charge attack damage will then increase by an additional 20% of attack as damage for 5 seconds. So you're getting an extra little buff over time, especially while you're picking up these particles. So it is kind of nice, and if you can get more refinements on this, this is jumping from like a 20% attack buff to like a 40% attack buff, so you're easily doubling the nice little extra attack buff that you get here. So you're usually buffing yourself a little bit more with a little bit more attack than normal, but honestly, in general, the weapon can be pretty good. I do think that it is a pretty solid option. Obviously, the other 4-stars that can work are like Deathmatch and Blackcliff Pole, as previously stated. You could even run the 3-star White Tassel for the crit rate main stat, and even something like Dragon Spine Spear, which is a physical damage bonus 4-star polearm, also can technically work as well, especially because you're getting some extra damage from like an icicle falling from the sky that can also do some pretty good damage based off of attack. Now looking beyond weapons, let's go ahead and talk about artifacts. The major set that you're really going to be using for the burst or the kind of burst support idea, as well as the tank bot or the shield support kind of idea with Zhongli when you're building him, is going to be the 4-piece tenacity of the Millilith set. This 2-piece increases HP by 20%, which is not only helping with his shield, but also his damage, and the 4-piece set states that when an elemental skill hits an opponent, the attack of all nearby party members is increased by 20%. And their shield strength is increased by 30% for 3 seconds. This effect can be triggered once every 0.5 seconds, and this effect can still be triggered even when the character who is using this artifact set is not on the field. which Zhongli will probably be doing. So when he has his skill that is going out on field, that skill is throwing out that resonance hit every once in a blue moon. So that is pretty nice to see as well. That's why this can stack and be pretty helpful. And this is also why this can be on someone like Layla as well. Now, the major way to really focus on this set, when we look at like specifically support characters, only looking at the support way to build Zhongli is basically going to be probably a triple HP run. Now, you could, if you wanted to, and the only reason you would really run this is if you have Favonius Lance as your weapon and you are running him as a shield bot, you would probably actually want to go a crit rate circlet, just so that you can make sure to get those particles created from the weapon. But besides that, usually the triple HP route here is going to be the best way, looking for HP and maybe if you want energy recharge, but mainly those crit damage and crit rate stats is really going to be the best help for you. And obviously HP, making sure that you're getting some damage, but also mainly focusing on the main stats, which are mainly helping with a lot of that shield. There are other sets that definitely can work. I know that other people use something like Archaic Petra, which if we take a look at something like Archaic Petra, it's a little bit different to overall look at because it does give you a geo damage bonus, but the 4P states that upon creating an elemental shard created through the crystallized reaction, all party members gain a 35% damage bonus for that particular element for 10 seconds. So this has to be a part of the core 4, which is where this can kind of fall off, because a lot of characters might not work specifically well with this. Maybe things that, characters that are, Animo characters or characters that are focusing in Dendro. This can't really happen because Crystallize can't happen with those elements. But this is pretty easy to happen because once again, the Geo Resonance that's happening, or the Geo Resonance hit that's coming from his Stone Steel, is hitting characters, and if you have an on-fielder or someone who's hitting with another element of the core 4, Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro, you are creating these elemental shards a little bit, pretty often, so it does help to kind of give that damage bonus to the character that actually created the reaction with Zhongli here. Besides that, I know that you could technically, if you really, really wanted to, run something like 4-piece Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City. You don't really care about the 2-piece because obviously with you can technically get the buff with the 2-piece, but it's really not something that you really have to worry about. The only reason that you would really care about this is if you have a character in the team that is focusing on being a Night Soul character. So if you have like Mualani or something like that, then this could work, and it does help if he's the one creating the Night Soul Burst, which all characters can create Night Soul Burst as long as they are hitting, as long as there's a Natlan character in the team that uses Night Soul, as well as they are hitting with an elemental attack. That is where Night Soul Burst kind of triggers and comes in. But the 4P states that after the equipping character triggers a reaction related to their elemental type, basically any crystallize, all nearby party members gain a 12% elemental damage bonus for the elemental types involved in the elemental reaction for 15 seconds. Now, you're not going to worry about the Night Soul Blessing state because obviously Zhongli can't go in it, so you're not getting the extra 28%, which is why I don't think that this 4-piece set is extremely good, because usually this set being thrown on another character that uses Night Soul can be a 40% elemental damage bonus rather than the 12%, which is why I don't feel like this is extremely good, and why I would tell people in general to just run the 4-piece Tenacity. I think that that works way better every single day of the week. I've even seen people, when I even talked about it as well, you could throw a 4-piece Deepwood on just because elemental skills and burst that hits opponents doesn't have to be a Dendro character, but it does decrease Dendro resistance for other party members as well. So when you decrease resistance on an enemy by hitting them with something, that Stone Steel that Zhongli does, technically Zhongli can be put on Dendro teams with this set. So he could actually be somewhat useful for those teams, but it's really not going to be something that you're going to really run most of the time. It might just be a backup set, but I did want to bring it up because it technically can be used. Besides that, looking at the burst support of the damage route, there's maybe 2 different sets that you can run with this. I did talk about the 4-piece of Tenacity of the Millilith. This does work and can work, but another set that can work is the 4-piece of Emblem of Severed Fate. You get 20% energy recharge, which is nice, and the 4-piece set increases elemental burst damage by 25% of your energy recharge. The only issue I have with this 4-piece set means that you have to go so much into energy recharge, which in my opinion is really not worth it, considering you're still with this set usually going into like attack percent or HP percent on the sands, which doesn't really make make any sense because the whole point of him is to go for those stats, not energy recharge, because he has such a low burst or energy cost for his burst. So it doesn't really feel worth it. So honestly, with this, I would still run the 4-piece Tenacity of the Millelith or a 2-piece Tenacity of the Millelith with like an Archaic Petra to get the geo damage bonus. Or you could even run something like a 4-piece Noblesse Oblige, which increases your elemental burst damage by 20%, and when you use your burst, increases all party members' attack by 20%. So something like Noblesse could also work for the burst support damage type route with Zhongli. Or once again, those 2-piece of HP, elemental burst damage, or something like the geo damage bonus from Archaic Petra could also work as well. When we look at main stats for these two sets, or these two ways, with the shield bot way, once again, we went triple HP, but when we're looking at more of a burst support, I already kind of talked about it, but the Sands can go HP percent or attack percent. I believe most people are going to go at HP percent because it usually does better. And then the geo damage bonus on the goblet. I know some people also go HP percent on the goblet, but I believe that geo damage bonus usually works a little bit more anyways, especially if you have an HP percent weapon. And then on the circlet, you're not going to go HP percent because you're overstacking a little bit too much, especially when you want to try to get some damage out. So go for a crit rate or a crit damage circlet. Once again, if you're running a crit damage circlet, go for a crit rate circlet to make sure that you're making sure you're always critting, making sure that that crit damage is actually being useful for you. Make sure you're just basically watching your crit ratio with him when you're kind of building him as a burst support. Looking beyond this, let's go ahead and talk about him when we're actually looking at Constellations. Now, in my personal opinion, I think Zhongli, when he first initially kind of came out, he wasn't really someone that was maybe a completed character, which is why he got a tune-up, and especially being an Archon, definitely needed one because of how he was before. But now I think he's a perfectly fine character at C0. I do think his C1's pretty good. The C2 is really only for co-op, and beyond that, I don't really feel like it's really worth it to go any more Constellations into him. In my personal opinion, if you're going to get Zhongli, stay at C0, he's perfectly fine. But let's talk about the Constellations anyways. Looking at the first constellation, it states that it increases the maximum number of stone steels created by the skill, and that you can basically have 2 of those at the same time rather than 1. So instead of only having 1 on the field, you can now have 2. That can help other characters with more geo constructs on the field and whatnot. It also does help him do more damage by having more stone steels on the field at one time. It is pretty nice. It's helping other characters. It's helping him. You know, there's a lot of good positives to have. Also, you know, when you are talking about looking at his talents, if you're trying to use his skill to kind of maybe have a factor of using the skill to maybe break shields or something like that, because that's another great thing about Zhongli is he can tear through shields with his skill, especially the hold skill as well, is that you're still waiting a 12-second cooldown. So if you're trying to tear through shields, that C1 can be extremely helpful if you're trying to tear through shields, because now you have 2 of them that you can creating a lot of shield breaking. Looking at the C2, it states that the burst grants a nearby character on the field a Jade Shield when it descends. So any nearby characters, usually, once again, this is a co-op type thing when you use your burst, they get a Jade Shield as well, compared and based on what you get when you use your skill. Looking at the C3, it increases the level of the skill by 3, and the C5 increases the level of the burst by 3. The C4 states that it increases the burst AoE by 20% and increases the duration of Planet Befall's petrification effect by 2 seconds. When we look at the petrification, it is going to be a 3.8 seconds, and is now going to be 5.8 seconds, so almost 6 seconds long. Basically half the amount of time of the cooldown, they are going to be in the petrification status. So honestly, a pretty good constellation with the C4. Once again though, not really worth it to jump through all those hoops to get to that constellation. Looking at the C6, it states that when the Jade Shield takes damage, so anytime that you are hit with the shield on you, 40% of that incoming damage is converted to HP for the current character. Makes him basically unkillable. A single instance of regeneration cannot exceed 8% of that character's max HP though, so if it's a huge, 100,000 damage hit, you obviously are not going to get 40,000 HP. That's going to be near what his HP is going to be at, so it can't exceed more than 8% of his max HP. So and that also doesn't mean that it's only for him, it's just whoever's the current character. So you could throw this shield on, swap to another character, and that character who might have a low HP could get healed by something hitting it. So the C6 can be pretty helpful, just for basically being not only just a tank, but now also a healer as well. Once again, another reason that I don't think that the constellations on Zhongli are really worth it in the first place. If you really like Zhongli and you're like, okay, I have to have a constellation on Zhongli just to say I do, go for the C1, that's it. Besides that, though, I really don't feel like any of the constellations are worth it. If you're a huge co-op person, the C2 might be worth it, but I really don't feel like it's that good anyways. I don't really feel like it's very necessary. It can be good for co-op, but that's about it. Now, when we look at teams and we're talking about Zhongli, the major way that we need to think is Zhongli can be fit on any team. It doesn't really matter who it is, what it is. It doesn't matter how it's really going. Any team is going to work well with Zhongli. Once again, if you have him on a Dendro team, throw on a 4-piece Deepwood. If you have him, with a character that likes attack percent, throwing on a 4-piece Tenacity or throwing on a 4-piece of Noblesse Oblige is going to work just fine. If you want to build him a certain way and a certain, prowess, then he's going to work on certain teams better than others. His best team that he was on in the past was mainly looking at Hu Tao, Yelan, Xingqiu, and obviously himself. The great thing about Zhongli is that he's the best shielder, and the other great thing is that he doesn't have to heal characters unless you get to the C6. Which someone like Hu Tao really cares about, considering she doesn't want to be healed and she wants to stay at a low HP. So him being the best shielder and her being someone that wants to stay at a low HP, it was a perfect match. And considering that she's basically his boss, which is a very weird thing to happen considering he's the archon of the nation, it's very interesting to see how these characters both work extremely well together even after all this time. Zhongli is another great character for someone who's on the banner right now, which is Neuvillette. A lot of people who have Neuvillette might not have the C1, and the C1 with Neuvillette increases your interruption resistance when you're doing your charges. And if you watched the video in the past or you know how or looking at how Neuvillette works, you're mainly focusing on making sure that he doesn't get knocked out of his charging mode, or while he's doing his Hydro Beam in the first place, which he can get knocked out of as well. So Zhongli, being an extremely good shielder, could also just be, instead of putting possibly 180 wishes into a Constellations of Neuvillette, now you can put those wishes towards Zhongli. And the other great thing is that Zhongli, unlike a Constellation of Neuvillette, Zhongli can be put on other teams to be a shielder and obviously increase that interruption resistance because they're hitting the shield, not the character. So Zhongli can also be extremely useful for other characters that don't want to be hit, which you're mainly looking at characters like bow characters, especially charge attack characters. Characters like Ganyu. Ganyu was another great character that Zhongli worked with. Linny could also be another solid one. Linny likes 2 other pyro characters and a 4th character that's a flex, and Zhongli can work extremely well with that. Once again, being another reason that with Archaic Petra or something like that, with that core 4 element, he could also be extremely good there to still give them a buff based on him creating a reaction with that. Another team that he could be useful for is a whole just mono Geo team, throwing in a character like Ito with someone like I don't know, someone like Goro and another Geo character like Shilonen or Kachina or whatever. Probably Albedo, actually, because Shilonen wouldn't really work. But Zhongli would be the 4th character in that instance, being the shielder for the team. So you've got some buffers and you don't really have a healer for you, so you just use someone like Zhongli, which could be extremely good. There's so many teams that Zhongli can work for, and I probably didn't even go over every single one because there's just that many. In the past and in the future, Zhongli is going to be a solid character. Even if someone in the future likes it, Lolly might do a little bit better or maybe be a better buffer as well as pretty good shielding, Zhongli's still probably going to be an extremely good character to pick up no matter what happens in the meta. Well, that's everything I've got, and while we have the infamous line going on about Osmanthus wine, if you guys do remember, please go ahead and like and share the video. Also, if you guys like the video as well, go ahead and subscribe. Thank you guys though for watching the video. I hope you guys did enjoy it. Let me know down in the comments how you guys felt. If you guys have any other ideas with Zhongli, maybe different teams, things maybe I didn't mention, go ahead and let me know. Thank you guys though for watching the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.